My name is Ethan, and for as long as I can remember, I've been a man of science. Logic and reason were my guiding forces, the fundamental principles by which I navigated the world. I believed only in what could be measured, proven, and repeated. The physical universe, with its intricate laws and endless mysteries, was my playground, and I reveled in uncovering its secrets. Religion, on the other hand, was something I never understood. To me, faith was an abstraction, an outdated crutch for those who couldn't handle the stark realities of existence. It was something I dismissed with confidence, certain that my worldview held all the answers I would ever need. I grew up as the kind of kid who always had his hands busy, dissecting frogs in the garage, building rudimentary robots from old radio parts, and endlessly tinkering with anything I could get a hold of. My parents encouraged my curiosity, marveling at the little contraptions I would present at the dinner table. While other kids were playing sports or video games, I was buried in science textbooks, fascinated by the natural laws that governed life. My mind craved answers, and I thought science was the only way to find them. It wasn't just a subject I studied, it was the lens through which I viewed everything. The world made sense to me through equations and experiments, and I found comfort in that clarity. As I grew older, my passions turned into a career. I became a software engineer, diving headfirst into a field that felt like the perfect synthesis of logic and creativity. To me, the world was a complex machine, one governed by rules, algorithms, and systems that could be understood and manipulated. My work was my sanctuary, my chance to craft order out of chaos. I didn't just see technology as a tool, I saw it as the key to humanity's future. In a way, logic became my religion. I worshipped at the altar of progress, innovation, and reason. And I was good at what I did. I climbed the ranks quickly, earning accolades and respect for my ability to solve problems others couldn't. I prided myself on my intellect, my ability to see through what I considered the illusions of faith and superstition. Religion, to me, was a relic of the past. I viewed it as illogical, outdated, and unnecessary in the modern age. I couldn't fathom how people could accept something that couldn't be empirically proven. Faith seemed to me like a surrender to ignorance, a refusal to acknowledge the harsh truths of the universe. I wore my skepticism like a badge of honor, convinced it made me superior to those who followed what I saw as fairy tales. I thought I was above them, smarter, more rational, and more grounded in reality. To me, religion was a crutch for the weak, a way to avoid facing the inevitability of death and the meaninglessness of existence. And death was the ultimate truth, wasn't it? I believed that when we died, that was the end. No afterlife, no souls, no judgment, just oblivion. I told myself that fear of death was irrational, a waste of energy. Why fear the inevitable? I saw death as a simple cessation, the final closing of a book with no sequel waiting. It wasn't something to dread, it was just a fact of life, as natural and unavoidable as the laws of thermodynamics. I thought I had made peace with it. After all, what was there to fear in non-existence? My life was driven by a singular purpose, innovation. I wanted to change the world through technology, to leave behind something tangible and impactful. I believed our actions were all that mattered, our contributions to society, our legacy. I thought that as long as I kept creating, kept pushing boundaries, I was fulfilling my purpose. I didn't need anything else. I didn't need faith or spirituality. My work was my meaning, my proof that I was making a difference in a universe that didn't care. I wasn't afraid of death because I thought of it as an ending, not a transition. I told myself that there was nothing to fear in that. Life was finite, and that was its beauty. The fleeting nature of existence made every moment precious, didn't it? At least, that's what I told myself. I thought I had it all figured out. But then, everything changed. It started subtly, flashes of light in the corner of my vision, strange sensations that I couldn't explain. At first, I thought it was fatigue or stress. I'd been working on a new project, pouring countless hours into it, and I figured my mind and body were just rebelling against the lack of rest. But the feelings persisted. They grew stronger, more intrusive. It was as if something was trying to get my attention, something beyond my understanding. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I didn't recognize. Was it fear? Uncertainty? I didn't know. All I knew was that something was happening to me, and I couldn't explain it. I began to feel tired in a way I never had before. No amount of sleep could shake the exhaustion that clung to me like a shadow. My work, once my refuge, became a struggle. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't focus. My mind, usually so sharp and reliable, felt clouded. And with that came a creeping sense of unease, a feeling that something was slipping out of my control. I told myself it was nothing, just a phase, but deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong. As the days passed, that unease turned into an overwhelming sense of foreboding. It felt like the calm before a storm, like the universe was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen, something that would change everything. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was coming. And I had a bad feeling about it. That night, everything came to a head. I was driving home late from work, my mind a jumble of fatigue and frustration. The streets were quiet, the city bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. I was halfway home when it happened. A truck swerved into my lane, headlights blinding me as it barreled toward me. Everything happened so fast. Too fast. I remember the sound of the crash, the screech of tires, the shattering of glass, the crunch of metal. My car spun out of control, the world outside a blur of chaos and light. And then, silence. Everything faded to black. When I came to, I wasn't in my body anymore. I was floating above the scene, watching it unfold as if it were a movie. I saw my car, crumpled and smoking. I saw my body slumped over the steering wheel, motionless. And yet, I felt no pain, no fear. Only peace. It was the most profound calm I had ever experienced, a stillness that seemed to envelop me entirely. I looked down at my own lifeless body, shocked but strangely detached. It was surreal, seeing myself from the outside, as if I were a stranger. And then, I felt it, the pull. Something was drawing me forward, something I couldn't resist. I wasn't bound by physical laws anymore. I was free. And then I saw it. The light. It wasn't like any light I'd ever known. It wasn't just bright, it was alive. It radiated warmth, love, and power. It wasn't a physical phenomenon, it was a presence, conscious and infinite. It called out to me, not with words, but with a feeling so profound it defied description. I was drawn to it, unable to resist its pull. Part of me wanted to explore it, to understand it, while another part of me was terrified. For the first time in my life, I felt small. Insignificant. I moved toward the light, through what felt like a tunnel. As I traveled, all my anxieties and fears began to fade. I felt more clear, more free, more open than I ever had before. It was as if layers of doubt and skepticism were being peeled away, leaving behind only the essence of who I was. At the center of the light, I saw him. Jesus. He wasn't what I expected. He wasn't the imposing figure I had seen in religious art or the distant deity I had dismissed in my life. He was compassion personified, radiating understanding and love in a way that was overwhelming and undeniable. I knew instantly that I could trust him. Jesus didn't speak with words. He communicated directly to my mind, a silent yet profound exchange that left no room for misunderstanding. He knew everything about me, my doubts, my pride, my hidden fears, and yet, he accepted me completely. As I stood before him, I felt all my defenses crumble. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be truly known and truly loved. Jesus looked at me, not with judgment or reproach, but with an unfathomable love that pierced through every wall I had ever built around myself. His presence was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was as though he was the embodiment of truth itself. And then he spoke, not with words, but directly into my mind, into the very core of my being. You searched for truth in science, he said, but I am the truth, and I am love. My love is not earned, it is a gift, freely given. Open your heart to it, Ethan. His words were both comforting and unsettling. All my life, I had relied on logic and reason, on what could be proven and explained. But here, in his presence, I realized how limited my understanding had been. There was a depth to this love, this truth, that transcended anything I had ever known. And yet, it didn't feel alien or distant, it felt like coming home. I allowed you to have this experience, Jesus continued, so that you may see there is more to life than logic. Salvation is not something you achieve through effort or intellect. It is a gift, meant for everyone who chooses to accept it. He showed me his life, not as a series of events, but as a living testament to love and sacrifice. I saw his teachings, his miracles, his compassion for the broken and the lost. And then I saw the cross. I felt the weight of it, the pain and suffering he endured, not out of obligation, but out of a love so profound it defied comprehension. It was a love that transcended all understanding, a love that reached even me, despite all my doubts and pride. I took your burdens upon myself, he said. You no longer need to prove anything to me. I love you as you are, unconditionally. Let my grace guide you. Tears streamed down what felt like my face, though I was no longer bound to my physical body. For the first time, I felt the weight of my skepticism and arrogance lift. I had spent my entire life trying to control, to explain, to master the world around me. And here, in the presence of Jesus, I realized how futile that had been. The peace I felt was unlike anything I had ever known. Salvation is found not through the mind, but through the heart, he said. All I ask is for your love, Ethan. That is all I have ever wanted. He showed me a world filled with light and joy, a place that felt like my true home. It was a vision of heaven, not as an abstract concept, but as a living reality. It was a place of pure connection, where love flowed freely and endlessly. And then he showed me something else, a void, a place devoid of light and love. It was not a place of fiery torment as I had imagined hell to be, but a realm of profound emptiness and sorrow. I could feel the sadness of those who had rejected him, their isolation and despair. My path is not to be followed blindly, Jesus said. It is to be lived. It is a journey of love, of acceptance, of freedom. This is the way to the truth. He explained that his love was for everyone, that it was available to all who would open their hearts to it. Your experience today is an invitation, he said. An opportunity to truly live. Come home, Ethan. Find peace in my love. I felt a pull, an invitation to trust him, to let go of everything I had clung to for so long, my pride, my doubts, my need for control, and to embrace faith. It wasn't an easy choice. A part of me resisted, clinging to the familiar, to the logical. But in his presence, that resistance felt small and hollow. For the first time, I saw faith not as a weakness, but as a strength, a surrender to something greater than myself. Your story is not just for you, Jesus said. You must carry this light, this love, to others. There are many who are lost in darkness, just as you were. Share what you have seen, what you now know. He promised me that I would never be alone, that he would guide me every step of the way. Your strength will not come from yourself, he said. It will come from your faith in me. Trust in me, Ethan, and I will never fail you. He revealed to me a new purpose, one that went far beyond anything I had imagined for my life. My mission, he said, was to be a vessel of love, to bring his light to those who needed it most. It was a calling that filled me with both awe and humility. How could someone like me, someone who had spent his life rejecting him, be entrusted with such a task? But Jesus saw something in me that I couldn't yet see in myself. I have chosen you, he said, not because you are perfect, but because you are willing. Go, and live by my example. I felt his love surround me, enveloping me completely. In that moment, I surrendered. I let go of my doubts, my fears, my old self. I accepted his love, his grace, his invitation. And in doing so, I felt reborn. My old life, with all its pride and certainty, was gone. I was new. You are free to choose, Jesus said. I will not force you. But my love will always be here, waiting for you. His final words echoed in my soul, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Through me, you will find the path to the Father. Do not forget this, Ethan. Live your life in the memory of this love. And then, the light began to fade. I felt a pull, a gentle tug, drawing me back. I wanted to stay, to remain in his presence forever. But I knew my journey wasn't over. My time in this world wasn't finished. I woke up in a hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling the room. My body ached, every movement a reminder of the crash. But my soul was at peace. I knew I had been given a second chance, a gift I could never deserve. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive, but I knew better. It wasn't luck, it was grace. As I lay there, recovering, I replayed the experience in my mind. It felt more real than anything I had ever known. The doctors tried to explain it away, calling it a hallucination, a trick of the brain under extreme trauma. But I knew the truth. This was no illusion. It was a blessing, a revelation. I realized I couldn't keep this to myself. I had to share it, to tell others about the love I had encountered, about the grace that had changed my life. It wasn't easy. Many people didn't understand. Some thought I was crazy, dismissing my story as the ramblings of a man who had been through a near-death experience. But I couldn't stay silent. I had a mission, a purpose, and I was determined to fulfill it. I began speaking, sharing my story with anyone who would listen. I told them about the limits of science, about how logic and reason could only take us so far. I explained that beyond the physical world, there was a truth far greater than anything we could comprehend, a truth rooted in love. Some people listened. Others didn't. But I kept going, driven by the memory of that light, that love, that moment of undeniable truth. My life had been transformed, not by my own efforts, but by grace. And I knew I could never go back to who I was before. I found a new community, a group of people who understood what I had been through. They supported me, encouraged me, and reminded me that I was never alone. Together, we sought to live out the love we had experienced, to be a reflection of the grace we had been given. I was once an atheist, a man of science who thought he had all the answers. But now, my life is devoted to serving Jesus, to spreading his love and truth. I am no longer lost. I am home. And so, I end this story with an invitation to seek the truth for yourself, to open your heart to the love that is waiting for you. Jesus changed my life, and I know he can change yours too. All it takes is a single step of faith. Will you take it? The days that followed my awakening in the hospital were unlike any I had ever experienced. I was alive, yet I felt as if I had been reborn, not in the physical sense, but in a way that transcended anything the logical part of me could grasp. My mind, which had always been my fortress of reason, was now humbled by the knowledge that there were truths far greater than anything I could calculate or construct. I had been given a second chance, a chance to live not for myself, but for a purpose that extended beyond the narrow scope of my ambitions. I began to reflect on my life, on the choices I had made, and on the person I had been. I saw clearly now how my pride had blinded me, how my relentless pursuit of logic had left me cold and disconnected. I had spent years looking down on those who lived by faith, dismissing them as naive or misguided. But now, I understood that they had seen something I had refused to acknowledge, that the greatest truths are not found in equations or experiments, but in the depths of the human soul. My recovery was slow, but it was during this time that I began to feel the stirrings of a new mission take root within me. I couldn't keep what I had experienced to myself. It burned inside me, a beacon that demanded to be shared. And yet, I was afraid. How could I, a man who had spent his entire life rejecting God, now speak of him with conviction? Would anyone even listen? The doubts crept in, whispering that I was unworthy, that my voice would be dismissed as the ramblings of a man who had simply been through a traumatic ordeal. But then, I would remember his words, "Your story is not just for you. Share what you have seen, what you now know." Those words echoed in my heart, a reminder that this wasn't about me. It wasn't about my pride or my fears. It was about his love, a love so vast and all-encompassing that it had reached even someone like me. So I began to speak. At first, it was just to a few close friends and family. Their reactions were mixed. Some listened with rapt attention, while others struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the story I was telling. But I didn't stop. Gradually, my audience grew. I found myself speaking to groups, to communities, to anyone who was willing to hear. I shared the details of my near-death experience, describing the light, the love, and the presence of Jesus that had forever changed me. I didn't sugarcoat my past. I spoke openly about my skepticism, my arrogance, and my dismissal of faith. I wanted people to understand that I hadn't been seeking God when this happened. I hadn't been looking for answers beyond the physical world. And yet, He had found me. He had reached out to me in my darkest moment, not because I deserved it, but because His love is that profound. The more I spoke, the more I realized how many people were searching, just as I had been. They were searching for meaning, for connection, for something greater than themselves. Some approached me after my talks, their eyes filled with questions they didn't know how to ask. Others remained silent, but I could see the wheels turning in their minds. And then there were those who dismissed me outright, who clung to their skepticism as tightly as I once had. I understood them. I had been one of them. But I also knew that the seeds were being planted, and that was enough. As time went on, I began to notice something remarkable. My work as a software engineer, which I had once viewed as the pinnacle of my purpose, now took on a new dimension. I started to see my skills not as an end in themselves, but as tools that could be used to serve others. I began developing programs and technologies aimed at helping people, tools for education, for communication, for healing. It was as if my old life and my new purpose were merging, aligning in a way that felt divinely orchestrated. I also found a community of faith, a group of people who welcomed me with open arms despite my past. They didn't judge me for the years I had spent denying God. Instead, they celebrated the transformation I had undergone. Through them, I learned what it meant to live by faith, to walk in love, and to trust in something greater than myself. They became my family, my support system, and my constant reminder that I was never alone. Of course, the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, times when the old habits of skepticism and pride tried to creep back in. There were days when I questioned whether I was truly worthy of the mission I had been given. But in those moments, I would turn to prayer, a practice that had once seemed so foreign to me, but now felt as natural as breathing. I would lay my fears and doubts before Him, and without fail, I would feel His presence, His reassurance, His love. One of the most profound moments came when I encountered someone who reminded me of my former self. He was a scientist, deeply logical and unapologetically skeptical. He attended one of my talks, sitting in the back with his arms crossed, a skeptical look on his face. Afterward, he approached me, his tone both challenging and curious. "Do you really expect me to believe all of this?" he asked. "You're telling me you met Jesus? That He spoke to you? That this is the truth?" I looked at him, seeing the reflection of the man I had been not so long ago. And then I told him the same thing I tell everyone: I don't expect you to believe me. But I do ask you to consider the possibility. To open your heart to the idea that there might be more to this life than what we can measure or explain. Because I didn't believe either. And yet, here I am. We talked for hours that night. He didn't leave a believer, but I could see the cracks forming in the walls he had built around himself. And that was enough. I had learned that it wasn't my job to convince anyone. It was simply my job to share, to plant the seeds, and to trust that He would do the rest. As the years passed, my life continued to change in ways I could never have anticipated. I found a depth of joy and peace that I had never known, even in the most successful moments of my career. I discovered the beauty of living not for myself, but for Him and for others. And I learned that faith is not a destination, but a journey, a daily choice to trust, to love, and to believe. There are still moments when I look back on the man I used to be, the life I used to live. And while I once might have felt shame or regret, now I feel gratitude. Because it was through my doubts, my struggles, and my skepticism that I was ultimately led to the truth. It was through my refusal to believe that I came to understand the power of grace. And so, I continue to share my story, not because it is extraordinary, but because it is a testament to the love and mercy of the one who changed everything. I tell it with the hope that it might reach someone who, like me, is searching for answers in all the wrong places. I tell it with the conviction that his love is for everyone, no matter how far they may feel from him. And I tell it with the faith that, just as he found me, he will find them too. Every time I shared my story, I felt the weight of its significance. It wasn't just a retelling of events, it was a bridge, a chance to connect with people who had spent their lives searching for meaning, just as I had. I began to understand that my experience wasn't meant to be a singular revelation for my benefit. It was a spark, a light meant to be carried forward. As I continued to speak to audiences, I encountered people from all walks of life. There were those whose faith had been shaken by loss or hardship, those who had grown up immersed in religion but had drifted away, and those who, like me, had never believed at all. Each interaction felt like a divine appointment, an opportunity to plant seeds of hope and truth. One night, after a particularly emotional talk, an older woman approached me. Her hands trembled as she held onto a small cross around her neck. Tears streamed down her face as she said, "I lost my son last year. He was only 25, and I've been so angry at God ever since. But hearing your story tonight, it reminded me that He hasn't abandoned me. That His love is still here, even in my pain." I didn't have the words to respond at first. Instead, I held her hands and prayed with her, something I never would have imagined myself doing just a few years prior. In that moment, I felt the presence of Jesus so strongly, as if He were standing there with us, offering comfort and healing. It was a reminder that His love reaches into the deepest wounds, the darkest places, and brings light. But not every encounter was like this. There were those who rejected my message outright, who scoffed at the idea of a near-death experience being anything more than a hallucination. Some accused me of exploiting people's emotions, while others simply walked away, unwilling to even consider the possibility of something greater. At first, these reactions stung. I wanted so badly to reach everyone, to make them see what I had seen, feel what I had felt. But over time, I realized that it wasn't my job to force anyone to believe. All I could do was share the truth as I had experienced it and trust that God would work in their hearts. One of the most profound lessons I learned was humility. For so long, I had operated under the assumption that I could control my life, that my intellect and hard work were all I needed to succeed. But my near-death experience had shattered that illusion. I had come face to face with the reality that I was not the master of my own destiny, that there were forces at work far beyond my understanding. And yet, instead of feeling insignificant or powerless, I felt liberated. I didn't have to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders anymore. I could trust in Him. This trust transformed every aspect of my life. My relationships, which I had often neglected in favor of my career, began to flourish. I reached out to old friends and family members I hadn't spoken to in years, apologizing for my arrogance and neglect. Many of them were shocked by the change in me but welcomed me back with open arms. I found joy in reconnecting with people and building bonds that weren't based on shared accomplishments or interests, but on genuine love and care. My work also changed. I still loved technology, still marveled at the power of human creativity and innovation. But now, I saw it as a means to an end, not an end in itself. I began focusing on projects that could make a real difference in people's lives, programs for underprivileged communities, tools to help people with disabilities, and platforms to spread kindness and understanding. My colleagues noticed the shift in me, and while some were skeptical, others were inspired. One of them, a young programmer named Jordan, approached me one day and said, "Ethan, I don't know what's happened to you, but whatever it is, I want that peace. I want that purpose." Jordan and I began having long conversations about faith. He had grown up in a religious household but had drifted away, disillusioned by the hypocrisy he had seen in some of its leaders. I didn't try to preach to him or convince him of anything. Instead, I shared my story and listened to his. Over time, I could see his heart softening, his walls coming down. One day, he told me he had started praying again for the first time in years. "I don't know if I'm doing it right," he said, laughing nervously. "But it feels good." Moments like these reminded me why I had been given this second chance. It wasn't about proving anything or achieving some grand success. It was about love, sharing it, living it, and pointing others toward its source. Still, there were moments of doubt. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering why I had been chosen for this path. Why me, when there were so many others more deserving, more faithful? I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for certain: His grace wasn't about deserving. It was a gift, freely given, and all I could do was accept it and share it. One day, as I was preparing for a talk at a local community center, I received an email from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. It was a former mentor of mine, a brilliant physicist who had been one of the biggest influences on my career. He had always been a staunch atheist, even more so than I had been. The email was short, but it stopped me in my tracks. "Ethan, I heard about your experience. I don't know if I believe it, but I can't stop thinking about it. Can we talk?" We met for coffee a week later. He was as sharp and skeptical as ever, but there was a vulnerability in him I hadn't seen before. He asked me question after question, probing every detail of my story. I answered as honestly as I could, not trying to convince him, but simply sharing what I had experienced. At the end of our conversation, he leaned back in his chair and said, "I don't know if I'll ever believe what you believe. But I can't deny that you've changed. And maybe there's something to that." That conversation was a reminder that transformation doesn't always happen in an instant. Sometimes it's a slow process, a series of small steps toward the light. And sometimes the seeds we plant may not bear fruit until long after we're gone. But that's not for us to worry about. Our job is simply to plant them. As I write this now, years after my near-death experience, I am filled with gratitude. My life is not what I thought it would be, but it is richer and more meaningful than I could have ever imagined. I still marvel at the wonders of science and technology, but I no longer see them as the ultimate truth. They are tools, gifts from the Creator, meant to be used for good. And I am no longer the man I once was, arrogant, skeptical, and isolated. I am a man who has been humbled by grace, transformed by love, and given a purpose that extends far beyond myself. If you're reading this and you find yourself doubting, questioning, or searching, I want you to know that it's okay. Doubt is a part of the journey. So is questioning. But don't close yourself off to the possibility of something greater. Don't let pride or fear keep you from the truth. Because the truth is this: you are loved. Deeply, completely, and unconditionally. And that love is waiting for you, just as it was waiting for me. My story is not unique in its essence. It is simply a reflection of the greater story, the story of a love so profound, it reaches into the darkest corners of our lives and brings light. It is a story that is still being written, not just in my life, but in yours as well. And it is a story that will continue, forever and ever. As the years passed, I found that sharing my story was not only a calling, but a critical part of my own healing and growth. Each time I spoke, I revisited the moment I encountered Jesus, the moment that shattered every assumption I had ever held about life, death, and what lies beyond. And each time, I felt the same awe, the same gratitude, as I did on that day. It was as if the experience had been etched into my soul, an unshakable reminder of the love and grace that had saved me. The reactions to my story continued to vary. Some people were drawn to it, eager to hear more, to ask questions, to open their hearts. Others were skeptical, challenging me with questions that once would have come from my own lips. How can you be sure it wasn't just a hallucination? How do you know it wasn't your brain shutting down? I never grew frustrated with these questions because I understood them deeply. They came from the same place I had once lived, a place of doubt, of needing empirical evidence to feel secure. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't pretend to. But I knew what I had experienced, and I knew that it was real in a way that transcended any physical explanation. I would tell them, I can't prove it to you in the way you want. But I can tell you that it changed me, and that change is something no science could replicate. The skeptics were not the ones who troubled me most. What pained me the most were those who wanted to believe, but felt unworthy. I met countless people who carried burdens of guilt, shame, and regret so heavy they could barely look me in the eye as they spoke. One man, a father who had been estranged from his children for years, broke down in tears during one of my talks. "I've made too many mistakes," he said. "I've hurt too many people. How could God ever forgive me?" I placed a hand on his shoulder and told him the truth. None of us are worthy. Not me, not you, not anyone. That's the beauty of His grace. It's not about what we've done or haven't done. It's about His love, and that love doesn't have conditions. It's there for you, just as it was there for me. Moments like these reminded me why I had been given this second chance. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about my story. It was about Him, and the way He uses even the most broken among us to reach others. I began to see every interaction, every conversation, as an opportunity to reflect His love. Whether it was with a stranger at the grocery store or a packed room of people eager to hear my story, I tried to approach each moment with the humility and compassion that Jesus had shown me. My life continued to change in ways I never could have predicted. I began volunteering at shelters and community centers, places I had never given a second thought to in my old life. At first, I felt out of place, unsure of what I could offer. But I quickly realized that the most important thing I could give was my time, my attention, and my willingness to listen. I met people whose stories were filled with pain and hardship, but also resilience and hope. They taught me as much as I hoped I taught them, and I found myself growing in ways I hadn't anticipated. One of the most surprising turns in my journey came when I was invited to speak at a prison. I was hesitant at first. What could I possibly say to a room full of people who had experienced such different lives from my own? But as I stood before them, sharing my story, I realized that the core of my message was universal. It didn't matter where we came from or what we had done, His love was for all of us. After the talk, a young man approached me, his hands trembling as he spoke. "Do you really think there is hope for someone like me?" he asked. His voice was filled with desperation, as though he were clinging to the last thread of belief that his life could still matter. I looked him in the eye and said, "There is always hope. Always. As long as you're breathing, it's never too late to turn to Him." In that moment, I saw a spark of something in his eyes, a flicker of belief, of possibility. It was a reminder that even the smallest gestures, the simplest words, could make a difference. Over time, I began to receive letters and messages from people who had heard my story. Some shared how it had inspired them to reconnect with their faith. Others simply thanked me for being vulnerable, for showing that transformation was possible. One letter, in particular, stayed with me. It was from a young woman who had been on the brink of taking her own life. She wrote, "Hearing your story made me realize that I'm not alone, that maybe there's something more waiting for me. Thank you for giving me the courage to keep going." I wept when I read her words. It was a humbling reminder of the ripple effects of sharing our stories, of how even the smallest act of faith can reach someone in their darkest moment. But through all the highs and lows, the moments of doubt and the moments of triumph, one thing remained constant: His presence. I felt Him with me in every step, guiding me, strengthening me, and reminding me of the mission I had been given. Prayer became an anchor in my life, a way to stay connected to the source of all love and truth. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the weight of the world felt overwhelming, when I questioned whether I was truly making a difference. But in those moments, I would close my eyes, take a deep breath, and remember the light, the love, and the words He had spoken to me: "I am with you. Always." As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that has happened, I am filled with gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance I was given, for the love that reached me even in my pride and skepticism, and for the opportunity to share that love with others. My life is far from perfect, but it is full of purpose, full of connection, and full of the kind of joy that comes not from accomplishments or accolades, but from knowing that I am loved just as I am. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that no one is too far gone. No one is beyond the reach of His love. Whether you're a skeptic like I was, a believer who has lost their way, or someone who feels unworthy of grace, know this: you are seen. You are known. And you are loved. The light that found me is waiting for you, too. All you have to do is take the first step. As the years unfolded, I began to see my life as a mosaic, each piece of it, my successes, my failures, my doubts, and my transformation, forming a picture far greater than I could have designed on my own. What had once seemed like random, disconnected events now appeared to be part of a carefully woven plan. The arrogance I had clung to for so long, the belief that I was in control, now seemed laughable. There was a deeper story at work, one that I could never have written myself. One of the most profound realizations I had during this time was how interconnected we all are. Before my experience, I had lived in a bubble of self-sufficiency, convinced that my intellect and discipline were all I needed. But now, I saw how much we rely on one another, how our lives intersect in ways that can profoundly shape each other. I began to notice opportunities to be a source of hope and encouragement in even the smallest interactions: a kind word, a listening ear, a simple act of kindness. Despite this newfound perspective, life was not without its challenges. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed by the enormity of the mission I had been given. The world is full of pain, full of people searching for meaning in all the wrong places, and it sometimes felt as though I was trying to empty an ocean with a single cup. But in those moments, I would return to the memory of Jesus' words to me: your story is not just for you. Share what you have seen, what you now know. Those words reminded me that I didn't need to have all the answers or fix every problem. I simply needed to be faithful, to trust that He would use my story in ways I couldn't foresee. One particular event stands out as a turning point in my journey. I had been invited to speak at a large conference, an event that brought together people from a variety of backgrounds: scientists, philosophers, theologians, and everyday individuals seeking answers. The thought of standing before such a diverse and skeptical audience filled me with anxiety. What could I possibly say that would resonate with all of them? How could I convey something as deeply personal as my experience in a way that would make sense to those who hadn't lived it? I spent weeks preparing, praying, and reflecting. And then, on the night before the event, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. I didn't need to craft the perfect argument or anticipate every question. I simply needed to speak from the heart, to tell the truth as I had experienced it, and to trust that the rest was in His hands. When I stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on me, waiting, judging, curious. I took a deep breath and began to speak, not with rehearsed precision, but with raw honesty. I shared my journey from skepticism to faith, my encounter with Jesus, and the ways my life had been transformed since that day. I didn't shy away from the struggles or the doubts I had faced along the way. I wanted them to see that faith wasn't about having all the answers or living a perfect life. It was about surrendering to a love that was greater than anything we could comprehend. As I spoke, I could see a range of emotions ripple through the audience. Some listened intently, their expressions softening as they took in my words. Others remained stoic, their arms crossed, their skepticism evident. But there was one moment that stood out above all others. As I described the light I had seen, the overwhelming love and peace that had enveloped me, I noticed a man in the front row begin to weep. He tried to hide it, wiping his eyes and looking down, but the emotion was undeniable. I didn't know his story, but in that moment, I knew that something I had said had reached him. After the talk, a line of people formed, waiting to speak with me. The man from the front row was among them. When it was his turn, he hesitated, as though struggling to find the right words. Finally, he said, "I lost my wife a year ago. She was the love of my life, and I've been so angry at God for taking her away. I came here tonight hoping for answers, but I didn't expect this. What you described, that love, that peace, it's what I hope she's experiencing now. And for the first time, I feel like maybe I can believe that she is." I felt a lump rise in my throat as I listened to him. She is, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside me. And that same love is here for you, too. It's been with you all along, even in your pain. We prayed together, and as he walked away, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not for my words, but for the way God had used them to touch someone's heart. It was a reminder that this journey wasn't about me. It was about being a vessel, a conduit for His love and truth. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the people I had met since my life had changed, people who were searching, struggling, hoping. I realized that every encounter was a piece of a larger puzzle, a part of a story that was still unfolding. And while I didn't know how it would all come together, I trusted that it would. After all, I had seen firsthand the beauty of His plan, even when it seemed impossible to understand. As the years continued, I found myself drawn not only to speaking but also to writing. I began to put my story down on paper, not just as a memoir but as a testament to the power of grace. The process was both cathartic and challenging, forcing me to relive moments of doubt, fear, and transformation. But as I wrote, I felt His presence guiding me, helping me to find the words that would reach those who needed them most. The book, when it was finally published, reached far more people than I could have ever imagined. Letters and messages poured in from around the world, stories of people who had been touched, inspired, and even transformed by what they had read. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was from a young woman who had been on the brink of despair, struggling with thoughts of ending her life. She wrote, "Your story gave me hope when I thought there was none left. It made me realize that maybe, just maybe, I am loved, too." Reading her words, I was reminded once again of the incredible power of sharing our stories. They are not just for us, they are for the people who need to hear them, the people who are waiting for a glimmer of light in their darkness. And so, I continue to share, to speak, to write, not because I have all the answers, but because I have seen the truth. I have felt the love that changes everything, the grace that transforms even the hardest of hearts. My life is no longer my own, it is His, and I will spend every moment I have left serving Him. If there is one thing I want you to take from this, it is this: you are not alone. No matter where you are, no matter what you've done, His love is there, waiting for you. All you have to do is open your heart and take the first step. Because the truth is, He's been walking beside you all along. As I continued to share my journey, the realization deepened that my life was no longer about me, it was about Him and the countless lives He wanted to touch through the story He had given me. Each day brought new opportunities to reflect His love, whether it was through speaking engagements, quiet conversations, or even the simplest acts of kindness. The world, which had once seemed so cold and mechanical to my mind, now felt alive with purpose. Every face I encountered, every interaction I had, became a reminder of the interconnectedness of humanity, of the divine spark within each of us. One day, I received an invitation to speak at a local high school. At first, I hesitated. Teenagers, I thought, would be the toughest audience yet. What could my story mean to them? They were at the beginning of their lives, not grappling with the existential questions that had driven my own transformation. But something in me, perhaps the same still, quiet voice that had guided me since my experience, tugged at my heart. So, I accepted. When I arrived at the school, I was greeted by a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The students shuffled into the auditorium, their faces a blend of boredom and mild interest. As I began to speak, I could feel the weight of their attention, or lack thereof. But I pressed on, sharing not just the facts of my near-death experience, but the emotions, the fears, and the overwhelming love that had changed everything for me. At first, I wasn't sure if I was reaching them. Some students stared blankly, others whispered among themselves. But then, something shifted. I spoke about the moment I had encountered Jesus, about the warmth and acceptance I had felt in His presence, and I noticed a change. The room grew quieter. Eyes that had been wandering began to focus. It was as if the words were cutting through the noise of their lives, reaching a place they hadn't realized needed to be touched. After the talk, a young girl approached me. She couldn't have been more than 15, but her eyes carried a weight far beyond her years. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," I replied. She hesitated, as if searching for the courage to speak. Finally, she said, Do you think God still loves me, even if I've messed up? Even if I don't know how to believe in Him?" Her question hit me like a wave. In her voice, I heard my own doubts, my own struggles. I knelt slightly to meet her gaze and said, "Yes. 1,000 times yes. His love isn't something you earn, it's something He gives freely. No matter what you've done, no matter where you are in your faith, His love is there for you. All you have to do is let Him in." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you," she said softly before walking away. That moment stayed with me long after I left the school. It reminded me that faith isn't just about grand gestures or monumental transformations, it's about the quiet, personal moments when someone begins to see that they are loved, that they matter, that they are not alone. As time went on, I found myself drawn to more diverse audiences. I spoke in churches, community centers, corporate settings, and even online forums. Each setting brought its own challenges and rewards, but the message remained the same. There is a love that transcends all understanding, a grace that is available to everyone. And no matter how far you feel from it, you are never beyond its reach. One of the most unexpected invitations came from an international organization that worked with refugees. They asked me to visit a camp where people who had fled unimaginable hardships were trying to rebuild their lives. I hesitated at first, unsure of what I could offer to people who had endured so much. But again, I felt that gentle tug, that quiet nudge urging me to go. The camp was unlike anything I had ever seen. Rows of tents stretched as far as the eye could see, filled with people who had lost everything yet clung to hope. As I spoke to them, I realized that my story was not about comparing my struggles to theirs. It was about offering a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is light. Even in the deepest pain, there is love. One man, a father of 3 who had lost his home and much of his extended family, approached me after my talk. "I don't know if I believe in God anymore," he said. "How could He let this happen to us?" His question was one I had wrestled with myself, and I didn't pretend to have an easy answer. "I don't know why these things happen," I said honestly. "But I do know this: His love is still here. It's in the people who are helping you rebuild. It's in the strength you find to keep going for your children. And it's in the hope that refuses to die, even in the face of so much loss." He nodded slowly, as if turning the words over in his mind. "I want to believe that," he said. "I really do." As I left the camp, I felt a deep sense of humility. These people had endured so much, yet they still had the capacity for hope, for love, for faith. It was a reminder that the human spirit, when touched by grace, is capable of incredible resilience. Over time, I began to see that my journey wasn't just about sharing my story, it was about listening to others, learning from them, and walking alongside them. It was about being present, about offering a hand of support or a word of encouragement. It was about living out the love I had experienced in every interaction, no matter how small. Looking back now, I see how far I've come, not just in terms of faith, but in terms of understanding what it means to truly live. Life is no longer about achievements or accolades, it's about connection, about love, about serving a purpose greater than myself. And while I still have moments of doubt, moments when the weight of the world feels overwhelming, I know I am not alone. He is with me, always, just as He promised. If you've made it this far, know this: your story matters. Whether you're at the beginning of your journey or somewhere in the middle, whether you're filled with faith or struggling to believe, you are part of something greater than you can imagine. Your life has meaning, and His love is there for you, no matter where you are. So take that first step. Open your heart. And know that you are never, ever alone. In the years that followed, my life became a continuing testimony to the grace I had received. Each step forward felt like part of a larger plan, even when I couldn't immediately see the full picture. I began to realize that my transformation wasn't something that had been completed in a single moment. It was ongoing, a journey that deepened with every person I met and every story I heard. One of the most profound lessons I learned was about the power of vulnerability. For so much of my life, I had built walls around myself, presenting an image of confidence and control. Admitting weakness, sharing doubts, or revealing emotional wounds had once seemed like the ultimate failure. But after my encounter with Jesus, I understood that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. It was in those moments of honesty, when I opened up about my fears, my failures, and my struggles, that I connected most deeply with others. I began to see that my story wasn't just for the people who already believed. It was for the skeptics, the doubters, the ones who felt unworthy or too broken to be loved. It was for the people who, like me, had spent their lives searching for answers in all the wrong places, only to find themselves empty. And so, I made a conscious effort to meet people where they were, without judgment or expectations. One evening, after a small gathering at a coffee shop where I had been invited to speak, a young man approached me. He looked nervous, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. "I don't know why I'm even here," he said, avoiding eye contact. "I don't believe in God. I don't even know if I believe in anything. But something about your story. I don't know. It makes me want to believe. How do you even start?" His question stopped me in my tracks. How do you explain something so deeply personal, so transformative, in a way that makes sense to someone who hasn't experienced it? I thought back to my own journey, to the moment when all my walls had come crashing down. "You start by being honest," I said. "Not with me, not with anyone else, just with yourself. Be honest about what you're feeling, what you're searching for, and what's holding you back. And then, if you're ready, take a small step of faith. It doesn't have to be big. Just open your heart, even a little, and see what happens." He nodded slowly, as if turning the idea over in his mind. "I don't know if I can do that," he admitted. "What if nothing happens? What if it's all just nothing?" I smiled gently. "That's the risk, isn't it? Faith is about stepping into the unknown. But I can tell you this, when I finally took that step, I found something greater than I ever could have imagined. And I think you will, too." We talked for a while longer, and when he left, I felt a quiet sense of peace. I didn't know what would happen next for him, but I trusted that the seeds had been planted. And that, I realized, was enough. In the months that followed, I began to feel a growing pull to document not just my story, but the stories of others whose lives had been touched by grace. I had always believed in the power of storytelling, but now I saw it as a way to build bridges, to show the many ways that God's love manifests in the world. I started reaching out to people, friends, strangers, even those who had once doubted or rejected my message, and asked if they would be willing to share their own experiences. The project quickly grew into something far greater than I had anticipated. Each story was unique, yet they all carried the same thread: transformation through love, hope in the face of despair, and the undeniable presence of grace. There was the single mother who had found strength in her faith after losing everything. The former addict who had turned his life around and now helped others do the same. The elderly man who had spent decades running from God, only to find peace in his final years. As I compiled these stories, I realized how diverse and multifaceted faith could be. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all journey, it was deeply personal, shaped by each person's experiences and struggles. And yet, at its core, it was always about love, a love so profound that it could heal even the deepest wounds. The book that emerged from this project became another way to reach people, especially those who might never attend a talk or step into a church. I received letters and emails from readers around the world, sharing their own stories, asking questions, or simply expressing gratitude. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was from a man who described himself as the lifelong atheist. He wrote, "I don't know what I expected when I picked up your book, but I couldn't put it down. For the first time, I'm starting to wonder if maybe I've been wrong. Maybe there is something more." As I read his words, I felt tears well up in my eyes. It was a reminder that even the smallest ripple could create waves. I wasn't responsible for changing hearts, that was God's work. but I could be a vessel, a spark, a voice that echoed the love I had encountered. In the midst of all this, my own faith continued to grow. Prayer became a source of strength and comfort, a way to stay connected to the one who had given me this new life. I no longer saw it as a ritual or an obligation. It was a conversation, an ongoing relationship that grounded me even when the world felt chaotic or overwhelming. There were still challenges, of course. Not everyone welcomed my message, and there were times when I faced criticism or rejection. But I had learned to see those moments not as failures, but as opportunities to grow in humility and compassion. After all, I had spent so much of my own life rejecting God. How could I expect others to immediately embrace what had taken me so long to understand? One day, as I was reflecting on everything that had happened since my near-death experience, I felt a sense of overwhelming gratitude. My life was far from perfect, but it was full of purpose, full of connection, and full of a love that I could never fully put into words. I thought back to the moment when Jesus had spoken to me, when he had said, "Your story is not just for you." Those words had become the foundation of everything I did, a constant reminder that my life was no longer about me. It was about him, and the countless lives he wanted to touch through me. And so, I continue to share, to listen, to love. I don't know what the future holds, but I trust the one who holds it. My prayer is that, through my story and the stories of others, more people will come to know the truth I have found, that no matter where you are, no matter what you've done, you are loved beyond measure. And that love is waiting for you, just as it was waiting for me. All you have to do is open your heart. The journey isn't over, it's only just beginning. And I can't wait to see where it leads. As I sit here today, pen in hand, reflecting on the journey that has brought me to this moment, I am overwhelmed by a deep sense of peace and gratitude. The life I live now is so different from the one I had envisioned for myself, yet it feels infinitely more meaningful. I began this journey with a single, unshakable experience, an encounter that shattered the walls of skepticism and pride I had so carefully built over the years. But what I've come to realize is that this journey was never just about me. It has always been about him and the lives he has touched through me. There is a memory from my earlier days of speaking that has stayed with me, a moment that feels like a perfect encapsulation of everything I've learned. I had been invited to speak at a small church in a rural town. It was a modest place, the kind of church where the walls seemed to hum with years of prayers and hymns. The congregation was small, a mix of elderly members, young families, and a handful of teenagers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I shared my story as I always did, speaking honestly about my doubts, my struggles, and the love that had changed my life. After the service, as people began to file out, a young boy approached me. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, and he clutched a worn Bible tightly in his hands. "Mister," he said, looking up at me with wide, earnest eyes, "do you think God really knows who I am? Like, really knows me?" I knelt down so I could meet his gaze. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "He knows you better than anyone ever could. He knows every thought, every dream, every fear. And he loves you more than you can imagine." The boy's face lit up with a smile that I can only describe as pure joy. "I thought so," he said softly, as if the confirmation of what he had hoped for was all he needed. That moment stayed with me. It reminded me of the simplicity and power of the message I had been given to share. It wasn't about complex theology or eloquent speeches, it was about love. A love that sees us, knows us, and never lets us go. As the years went on, I found myself drawn more and more to these kinds of quiet, intimate moments. The large speaking engagements and the book tours were meaningful, of course, but it was in the one-on-one conversations, the small acts of kindness, that I felt the presence of God most deeply. I realized that the true measure of a life well lived wasn't in the number of people I reached, but in the depth of the connections I made. Now, as I look ahead, I find myself filled with hope, not because life is without challenges, but because I know I am not walking this path alone. I have seen the light in the darkest moments. I have felt the love that heals even the deepest wounds. And I have learned that the greatest gift I can give is simply to reflect that love in everything I do. This story, my story, is not one of perfection or certainty. It is a story of grace, of transformation, of a man who was lost and then found. And it is a story that continues to unfold, one day at a time. If you, dear reader, find yourself doubting, searching, or wondering if your life has meaning, let me leave you with this: you are not alone. You are seen, you are loved, and you are part of a story far greater than you can imagine. Take the first step, no matter how small, and trust that you are being guided by a love that will never leave you. As for me, I will continue to walk this path, wherever it may lead. I will continue to share the story that changed my life, not because I have all the answers, but because I have found the truth. And that truth is this: love is the most powerful force in the universe. It is the light that shines in the darkness, the hope that carries us forward, and the grace that makes all things new. Thank you for walking this journey with me. May your own path be filled with light, love, and the unshakable knowledge that you are never, ever alone.